Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation here on YouTube and Facebook. I'm so happy to be reunited with friends of mine from back in days of yore. Anne Marie, Joe, and Travis from Historians on Tap. What's up, everybody? How's everyone doing?
Good.
Doing great, John. Thanks for having us.
I want to thank Anne Marie and Joe for getting dressed up, and I want to thank Travis for wearing the flannel tonight for all of us up here in Ontario.
I got
He's
to
to
stay
listen
on
to
brand.
Nirvana as soon as he gets off this call.
Yeah, I catch enough flack up here for having my Pens banner up.
Ooh, I just realized I'm wearing Pens colors.
You
Gross.
are.
I need
yeah.
to change.
Yeah, you are.
flannel real
Thank you.
quick.
Thank you, Travis. I appreciate
Gross.
that. But I wanted to get together with everyone this evening and touch base. Obviously, we haven't seen each other in a while, but I also wanted to talk about your efforts with Historians on Tap, because I've been lucky enough to be on there, but we've never actually talked about it on my stuff. And we tried to on a number of occasions, and then things happen, and now we can finally get together and just hang out and talk about all that. So I've had some people come up to me throughout the years and say, hey, you do your thing and they do their thing, and we want to be able to do something similar. So we can talk about that tonight as well. But really, for everyone watching, we're going to have just a laid back chat about doing history in the public space and how we interact with the public or places where we want to do things at, or how we work the whole thing. What kind of ideas do we have? So first question I have to ask is, how did the Historians on Tap thing start? Who had the brainstorming going on?
I don't know that any one of us could take credit, but I can give you the Once Upon a Time version.
Okay.
Which is our first Historians on Tap was, I think it was October of 2019. Right? In Middleburg. At that time, Travis and I were colleagues, both working together for the Virginia Piedmont Heritage Area, and Joe was the director of another museum in Loudoun County, the Loudoun Museum. And so we were in each other's orbits. Like, I don't even think we knew Joe very well at that point.
Yeah, just kind of tangentially through mutual friends.
And Joe had done a program, was it called History on Tap, when you were doing solo talks at a couple of breweries?
No, I think that's what really sparked it. So Travis might have done some in Middleburg as well, or other spots, but I did a talk about a Virginia regiment at Gettysburg at a couple breweries. And that was sparked by the Loudoun County Libraries, I think, actually.
Right.
And I was like, hey, this
That's
is actually getting people coming to this. Like, I think Emery was at one of those, and it was like a early Saturday evening or a late Saturday afternoon at like Old Ox in Ashburn, and I had like 150 people at this lecture about Loudoun soldiers at Gettysburg. And there's no chance I'm getting that kind of crowd for any talk at a traditional museum. So I think we kind of knew that it was a good idea, and I would imagine you all were doing something pretty similar at VPHA. So I think we kind of thought maybe we could, rather than do a traditional lecture, try to figure out how to maybe tell some shorter stories over a common theme.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we weren't the first to come up with this idea. Plenty of other people are doing this across the country. But yeah, I think I remember the library being involved. I remember us talking about this. I think one of the things that really sparked it on our end is, as historians, we do all this research and we find all these crazy, weird little things that, it's not enough to write an article about, or it's not enough to produce an exhibit about, but it's still an interesting or compelling story. And so this is a good format for it. It's not an hour-long lecture. It's a little 15, 20-minute story.
Yeah.
And something that has a hook that's going to catch people's attention.
I always think of it as it's the story that you really can't or maybe shouldn't tell on the tour, but it's still like too good to pass up, and freeing it's challenging, I should say. It's challenging keeping the story short, but it's also freeing to just like, you've got 15, 20 minutes. What's the wild thing you've been waiting to tell your buddies, right? Or that you wish you could tell people but you don't want to do it on the official tour. And I think one of the things that really works for our model, because as Travis said, people have been doing talks in breweries and wineries for as long as, you know, the craft beverage industry has really been taking off. But I think that us having a triumvirate or 2 or 4 or however many historians we have, I always pitch my story as though I'm telling Joe and Travis.
Yeah.
So there's like a level of familiarity there. And there's a point at which, you know, it's appropriate even if you're not a history buff, but I'm going to tell it to you conversationally as though you and I are already like kind of on the same page. I'm not going to lecture you about the entire setup for the time period. I'm not going to try and explain necessarily every, you know, point that brought us to my storyline. And I think that helps people just engage where they are.
That's a really interesting thing, Emery, that I hadn't thought of. That I think sometimes we as public historians, or those of us who just work with the public, sometimes we tend to think of a certain audience a certain way. We're gonna talk to this audience this way, and then we're gonna talk to this audience a different way. And that's something I didn't think about asking until right now, but Anne-Marie brought it up, so I want to kind of extend that a little bit. How do you, Travis or Joe, how do you guys think about doing this kind of storytelling differently than your 9-to-5 way of doing storytelling? Because I think there's something there.
I mean, I'm so glad you just used the word storytelling. This isn't, you know, if I'm giving an academic lecture on the archaeology of the colonial Chesapeake, I know I'm talking to an academic audience who is interested in this. I'm going to use words. I'm going to use kind of a style that meets that. The thing that I think makes Historians Untapped so fun, and Anne-Marie touched on this, is that the three of us have known each other for so long. We've got such a great like rapport with one another. We can kind of like rag on each other. We can make jokes. We can interject, and I think that makes it much more. It's much more of a story than it is, you know, just reciting historical facts. And I think the secret to that is just, yeah, imagine you're telling a story like Anne-Marie said, to your buds instead of a classroom full of undergraduates or whatever.
Or the public.
The public, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you get feedback from people too. And I still hear it now from people. You know, I gave a talk last month, and people have been to some of the previous ones too. And without fail, something that they always mention is they just like the rapport between the speakers, and that happened completely naturally. And it almost got to the point I was like, I wonder if people get annoyed by us because like in some ways we kind of ignore them and we just chime in and interrupt each other and can be completely rude about it.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we even forget that we're talking to people out in an audience and not just sitting at a bar having this conversation. But then that's what people actually like, is that it's more of they can let, you know, everyone's letting their guards down more. It's not as stuffy, and they can hear comments that they might be thinking in their heads as well. So everyone without fail usually says that they like the fact that it is not just solely people lecture them for 15 minutes and then move on to the next one. They like that it's kind of a conversation as well, and that there's a conversation that happens during the story and in between.
Yeah, I mean, we get audience participation. We get people yelling stuff out. I think that really adds to the atmosphere of it. As you know, like during COVID, we were doing a million of these things online through Zoom, kind of like what we're doing now. And I felt that it was great, but at the same time, it was missing that audience participation aspect that I love so much about being in front of a live group of people. I mean, especially if a few drinks are involved and people get a little loose and they're, you know, I wouldn't sit at an academic lecture and start hollering at the people who are talking, but like, so we get all kinds of stuff from the people in the audience,
right.
and 99% of the time it's really fun.
It's positive heckling, like they're participating, but they're sharing it. And I think, kind of piggybacking on that point, I think that us having a good rapport, we feel comfortable also talking about historical figures very informally in this type of a program. So like we've called historical figures weenies in, you know, like we try and keep it, you know, PG or PG-13, but we feel like we can in an appropriate setting, like make fun of some of these people or identify with them in a different way. One character who shows up sometimes is Nicholas Creswell, who's an 18th century diarist. He's a young man who essentially comes over from England as his like post-college graduation trip, and he's just gonna like go nuts in the colonies and have a great time. And he ends up stuck here during the Revolutionary War. And he's a fascinating historical figure in his own right, but we love talking about him because he's a 20-something know-nothing who on several occasions almost burns a house down because of how drunk he is. And there's an element of that I think is maybe relatable for a lot of us who have been stupid young people at different times. And it gives us all, it gives the audience, I think, permission as well to not just see a historical figure as an old white guy who left a document behind or something. Like these are real people with foibles, and they make mistakes, and sometimes they write a poop joke on the wall, and that's what we remember about them 170 years later.
Yeah, there's like a universal human aspect to all of this, and like you said, that gets lost with so many historical figures. Even the ones that we have kind of put, especially the ones we put up on a pedestal. Anne-Marie and I we were at an event not too long ago talking a lot about George Washington and his family and kind of the drama going on there. I think it is important for people to be reminded that these were human beings, and that that makes them relatable. It makes them fun. It makes them funny. It makes them memorable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I got to ask, what was the first event like, coming together and actually doing it? What was it like for you, or what was the audience like? What was the experience like for all of you?
I
was scared shitless. I didn't know what to expect.
Were you really?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, the crowd was actually a lot better than I thought. Again, you never know what you're going to get. It's Middleburg. It was a Thursday, probably.
Very small town.
So you never know what you're going to get. But yeah, I remember I was pretty shocked by how many people. And it was an outside event, and it was that packed patio area. It went really smoothly. And I think at that time, too, I mean, we had a person there, so it was a guest. Mm-hmm. We might have even told a couple stories. I mean, we were doing really short stories then. I would say probably one thing that's evolved is that we kind of we tell more details of the stories now, and we get a little more involved and spend a little bit more time on it. I think that first one was really just scratching the surface on stories, and really just kind of getting to something and then not really digging deeper into it. So I think that's probably the biggest difference on the first one. And then I think as it went on, we realized that there's merit to, one, keeping the program to a certain length, which is important, but then also just giving ourselves enough time to chime in and have some discussion about it during, but then also having the ability to get a little more in depth in the topic, so people can take a bit more away from each story and make them a bit more memorable.
I will say logistically, our first History on Tap was again kind of in partnership with the library system, in that they helped promote it, which was really great. And the library system also gave each of us speakers a small stipend, kind of a thing, which is the only time the library has paid me to drink, which is pretty cool. And the venue, the brewery that we were at, had hosted other talks, kind of like one-off talks of us doing a more lecture style thing before. So they were also a known entity to us. And so the partnership structure was already there was a framework there based on more traditional models of programming, which was great. And when Joe says we had a great turnout, we're talking like 60, 65 people, right? We're not like blowing out a stadium or anything like that. But for a bar talk, for a weeknight talk, that's a good draw for us.
In a town of like 1,000 people or 800 people or whatever.
Mailing, the postal code in Middleburg is like 580 people. So 65 is a not insignificant proportion of those people. And one of the things that I think helped bring people out is that we were specifically telling stories about Middleburg, and that's the other kind of, I think, key element to what makes History on Tap successful, is that, yes, we have great rapport. Yes, we will travel to where the people are, but our goal whenever we give a talk is to tell you a story that happened within like 5 miles of that specific geographic spot of those coordinates. And I think that helps. And of course, that's a goal. It doesn't, and not all of us are always telling stories from that close, but it gives people a reason to show up and actually learn something off the wall that happened in their backyard, you know, and that helps give the brand more specificity.
Yeah, and again, touching on like that kind of making it human and making it relatable. These are people that most of these people are familiar with. They've heard the names, definitely sites that they're familiar with. You know, one that I always laugh about was we were in Leesburg and I was telling a story that related to the old pauper cemetery in Leesburg, which in the 1980s was developed and it's now under a Wendy's. And so like now whenever anyone goes by that Wendy's, they know that that's where like a bunch of people are buried. So we joke about the haunted Wendy's.
The haunted Wendy's, yeah.
And you don't get more local than that story. I mean, you could literally walk across the street and that's where it is from.
Right, that's right. That night we were
Blood Money Brewery was literally you could see it out the window.
See it out the window, and so like I think that is definitely an angle that makes it more fun for the audience.
Yeah, and for us all being, you know, really, you know, local historians with an emphasis on the local, like each of our organizations and kind of each of our career trajectories has really been, you know, you learn about the history of a specific place. You kind of learn who the players are or were in the community. And, you know, it just, I think it helps, you know, when I'm not necessarily telling a story about, you know, who was it? Monroe, Lafayette is visiting Monroe and their carriage breaks down.
Yeah, the horse dies and they're stuck
So
on
it's not about Monroe, the president, and the important things that he did. It's about Monroe when he was a resident. And just like however many people have experienced traffic getting back and forth from DC up to Leesburg, and then your car breaks down, again, that's a local story that now is something that you identify with and isn't just the president lived here, you know, kind of a story.
Yeah, there's fans in here watching. Thank you, Ken.
Oh, Ken. Hey, Ken.
Ken.
One of our loyal followers.
David here saying the
You guys.
historical sidebars that you all bring up is fantastic. Thank you all for being here, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. Greatly appreciate that. I remember the first one I did on the Tattooed Historian Presents series was in 2018, and I didn't even have a mic, so it was just I brought someone in to talk. Almost like a lecture, and then we had a little Q&A afterwards because that's what I knew at the time. And I'm like, I'll put you up there and you have a ball. And I didn't have a mic for it. So when I'm thinking about the first show that you all may have done and the first show I may have done, and seeing how far the progression has happened for a lot of us, because, you know, we're creating these events and we're thinking about the stories that we're going to tell. It's really interesting to watch the growth of not only the brands, if you will, but also the experience. And that's how do you think that has really changed over time for you all? Do you think there has been like a change over time, or is it something that just fit from the beginning and you kind of just tweaked it a little bit as you went?
I think from the get-go, we had a pretty good model. I mean, like Joe was saying, I think the small tweaks that we made were more just like dialing in kind of the length of the program, dialing in our, I don't like kind of the rhythm of it. I don't know how else to describe it, but you know, we typically have at least two of us, if not all three of us, if we can,
Right.
And then maybe like a local guest, you know, someone from that. And I think that's actually one of the biggest ways that we've grown is it's given us an opportunity to pull in all of these incredible historian friends that we have all over the country. I mean, especially when we were doing this online during COVID, we were pulling in literally people from around the country who could add so much to the program. I mean, when we do stuff down in Richmond, Joe's able to get some great people from like VMHC and other museums down that way. We've had people from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. You know, up in Frederick, you've been a guest up there in Frederick, John. Some of the other folks up there, Jake Wynn, Rich Condon. We have this incredible network of people, and it's given us an excuse to bring them in and get closer with them. And I think that's the biggest change we've made. I don't know about you guys, but the biggest growth we've had.
Yeah, I think doing them over live stream for 6 months or so actually kind of helped finalize what it ultimately became, just because I think that's where we really started having a lot of the discussion, because it's just, you know, three of us and a guest staring at each other on a screen. People could chime in,
Yeah.
but otherwise it was just us having a conversation, and that kind of carried on when we went live. It kind of extended and just continued on and grew in that regard, in terms of just the format of it. And I think over time we also just got more creative. We were doing them weekly during the pandemic, so I mean that was taking a lot of work up. So I mean, that really then forced us to think, okay, well, we can't just do like Leesburg History Part 7. Like,
Right.
we got to be a little more creative, and broaden that out a little bit. So I think then kind of having catchy themes and relatable themes and topics that people might want to hear about, really, I think came from the pandemic and some of the virtual ones that we continued on for. If it's in December, can we do something that can highlight some bizarre Christmas stories locally, or same thing for Halloween, or, you know, or Valentine's Day. So I think capitalizing on themes and topics that we think will be catchy for individuals, and a topic they might want to hear a couple of stories about, really came from the pandemic, and that's probably just the way it's just evolved over time a bit.
I also, I won't speak for Travis and Joe, but I think that it has helped me sharpen up some of my storytelling game, in that the way you tell a History on Tap story, the way you want to pitch a 15-minute story is very different than how you want to, you know, pitch a longer form story. And so, you know, that's one thing that as a historian, or just as a person too, if you can't make a quick pitch, if you can't get across kind of the messaging of what you're trying to say, you know, I think we've all had certain Historians on Tap events where, like, I didn't clinch it. You know what I mean? Like, you feel like you got close, you talked around it, but you didn't quite clinch it. And then there are some where, like, you feel like you really got it. And so I think that professionally, I've personally improved on, you know, on that ability too, to figure out, how do I tell this story, and what is actually the point? Is the point just that this happened, or that this historical figure was a little silly? Or is it more about, I'm trying to literally connect today's listener to some kind of relevancy to that story, to that past? And so it's not always very, like, philosophical, or, you know, it's not a religious experience, but it is something I try and think about, like, what actually is the takeaway here, and am I giving that person the takeaway?
Yeah, and to piggyback off of what Anne-Marie just said, I think another big component of that, and this comes especially with the live audiences, is, you know, as a historic interpreter, being able to read your audience and to kind of gauge their reaction, like how invested are they in this story? How, you know, am I landing this, or am I kind of wandering? Do I need to bring it back in? I think that skill, that it has helped me improve that skill tremendously, because, you know, at the end of the day, we're all as public historians, we're all interpreters, and we can talk all we want about stuff that interests us, but if we're not reaching the audience, then why are we even doing it? So that's definitely been a huge help for me, just getting the practice.
Yeah, and I think that kind of touches on what we haven't talked yet about the audience, like who's coming to these. And I would say, without a doubt, at least for programs I typically do, like, by far the youngest and most diverse crowds are the ones that are at breweries. I mean, it's not even close. And so, I mean, I think reading the audience is kind of an important part in terms of how you build the story, and then how you pick the topic, and really the key points you want to land. So I think it probably makes us a bit more cognizant of the fact that we need to make sure we are, you know, being very clear in the story and building upon it.
Yeah.
Because it is bringing in a lot more people who will not come to a lecture typically in a traditional setting, which is great, because not every museum says, you know, we want to have a more younger audience, we want a more diverse crowd, but then they fail to do so, and it's a constant struggle to get that.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly kind of going out beyond the museum is a very effective way to kind of start building a new audience.
And that's something that we take seriously too. And I appreciate, because we've had this conversation too within our, you know, our History on Tap network too, that, you know, we understand that we are three white people. You know, we understand that we ourselves belong to a specific demographic. And so when we talk about bring in diverse audiences, it's always with that caveat, with there's always more to do, right? There's always more inclusion that you can have. But I really enjoy that we've maintained that more diverse attraction, I think, for younger audiences. And I think part of that is because we're not tied to one part of history, one aspect of history, one century of history, one war in history, where there are plenty of other colleagues of ours who do these bar talks, but the constituency looks exactly the same as their membership base because they're telling the same stories that they tell in the lecture, right? You're still only getting Civil War buffs coming to your brewery talk if you're only telling Civil War stories. Yeah, maybe a few more wives are going to show up, but essentially you're not necessarily growing the audience. You're just kind of repackaging the same stories. You're not necessarily bringing new stories to the table.
Yeah, that audience is so key because, like Travis said, you're working off of them, you're feeding off of them. You want to see the numbers, but at the same time, you want to see different demographic shifts as you go through, because we do need to grow this circus tent of history out into a lot of different looking at people who have a variety of backgrounds and beliefs. And this is one way to do that through the programs like you do. What is the one thing that a lot of people have asked me previously is, how do you pitch this? How do you go to someone who, like, if someone is in Colorado or Washington State or somewhere, and they're like, they hang out at this brewery, maybe know the owner or something. How does someone pitch something like this? Because you had initial contacts through speaking engagements. Did you go out and seek other places and say, hey, this is what we do? How do you pitch that to someone? Anybody?
I'll let Amory handle that.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take part of it. So yes, this comes with part of an acknowledgement that as public historians, we all already exist in a community, right? And I would assume that's true of many of the folks that are asking that question, John.
Yeah.
And so part of it is like, think about the network that you already have. If you're part of an organization that already has outreach, think about your friends who already like you. It's always easier to start from somewhere and then grow. We happened to start with a list of venues that we knew already hosted talks like this, being breweries, and or we were already frequenters of certain breweries, and felt like we could make that soft pitch. Most of these venues, thinking specifically about breweries, but is also true of things like wineries or community centers or what have you, is they're looking for acts. They're looking for an extra event or something that is going to bring people through the door. And for us, it's an easy pitch because this is not an income driving program for us. It's much more about outreach and donations and honestly just the mission of history itself. And so when we come and we're pitching what is essentially a free program, maybe we get some donations or free drinks or whatever out of it. But what we need from them, we need a room. We need you to advertise and bring in the bodies. And if you've got it, we'll take a sound system too. And so that makes it a lot harder to say no to, at least to give it a shot. And there are plenty of places that we've given talks at that it's like a one and done and it doesn't work. It's a first date and it doesn't track.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not everyone's a keeper.
Yeah.
No. And I think a big part of that too, and Anne-Marie kind of hinted at this, is we're not making money. We don't charge money for this. One of the best ways we really pitch it to them is, if you have a night during the week that's low, a Wednesday night at most breweries is pretty slow. Thursday nights are usually kind of slow. Whatever night's not trivia night tends to be slow. So, if we can bring in 50, 60, 70 people, that's a good night for them.
Right.
And that's all we're really asking for is like you said, a venue, a place to talk. From those earliest ones that we did, we kind of had already built those connections, but we've had to go out and kind of almost, I've like cold called places before, just walked in and handed in my card, say, this is what we do.
Yeah. And sometimes it's a strikeout and sometimes we never hear back and that's that.
Yeah, I'm not going to name a certain winery in Maryland that I had a great conversation with their manager not too long ago, and they were so hyped about it. I never heard anything else about them.
It's
One of those,
also-
I mean, my sister talked to a bar manager and was like, "Oh, my brother and his friends do this thing," and that's what got us in touch with Frederick Social. They've been one of the keepers. They've been one of the ones that have had us back multiple times. They're some of our most loyal supporters. Shout out to them. Joe
so have a hot sister. That's a key aspect of this.
Jesus. I mean, but like I said, leveraging these personal connections. How about that, Anne-Marie?
No, I mean, I was saying that. I was
you-
saying that with like all fandom to your sister. Like
I'm
that's,
going to tell her you said she was hot.
she'll like it.
It's on video now.
The internet knows. It's okay. Your mom hit on my husband. I can hit on your sister.
Yeah, all's fair in love and war. Like
It's
Joe,
more
how did
family
you get
drama
on
from the
Star
Shaw
Hill? Sorry.
So we want more family Shaw drama.
God. Yeah, this will be a subject of a Historians on Tap someday.
We do want to do a roast of Travis at some point.
We do want to do a roast of Travis.
Oh, I want to be invited to that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you definitely will be. You've known me long enough.
Yeah.
Like one of our biggest keepers, I guess, is Star Hill down in Richmond. Fantastic venue, huge turnout every time we go there. Like, I don't even know how you got in touch with them, Joe.
I reached out to, I mean, everyone, it's kind of, I think, always shocking to all of us where we've either had conversations that dropped off with some places. We've had a couple of programs we did, and the brewery didn't promote it at all. And especially if we aren't even necessarily local to that brewery, like we don't have a following that would even know who we are. And if you don't promote it, there's absolutely no way someone's going to hear about this. So some get it and some don't. It's kind of just, they either do or they don't with it. And with Star Hill, it's a great venue in Richmond. There's a few different throughout Virginia. And I must have reached out to them. And they've been great. I mean, they basically said, anytime I want to do a program, just let them know. And if it's open, I've got it. And they've got their own sound system. They've got their own stage. They also just promote the heck out of pretty much everything, which is, like, again, this is their money, which never makes sense to me why breweries don't promote it themselves, because they're the ones who are financially benefiting the most. And yeah, Star Hill's been a huge supporter, and they want me to do more of them. It's just not in the cards right now. But if they know that, one, it brings in more. I've done them on Fridays and weeknights, so whether it's weekend or weekdays, it's pretty much a slam dunk for a pretty strong crowd. I promote it certainly through work, and they do a lot of really fun promotion for it in the lead up to it. And it's just a really comfortable environment. There's space for it, and it's the perfect venue for it. And they've got the AV system right there.
Yeah, we've definitely had to venue shop, and I feel like where we are now is we have kind of these three, I would say, almost home bases between Frederick Social, Star Hill in Richmond, and then Old Ox in Ashburn, Virginia. And we've done enough History on Taps at these locations. We're known entities to each other. And so it's very easy for one of us to call there and say, hey, either we have a schedule opening, or can I pitch you a History on Tap theme? And the answer is almost always going to be yes, with some like calendar finagling. And that's been really nice, because there were a few years, I would say, after the pandemic when we really did, we cast a wide net on purpose. But it's kind of disheartening to try and, sell something that is really, we think, a benefit to the business and a benefit to the community. And for our local demographic, because if there are folks watching from outside of Virginia, our area where I am in Northern Virginia, we have over 30 craft breweries in the county. We have over 50 wineries in the county. And so this is a pool to choose from, but there are plenty of other locales that, like, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's a llama farm. I don't know, but you have to kind of think about the venues that are actually just chock-a-block wherever you are. And for us at this time, it's those breweries.
Yeah, I think the key is the venue space. Can it fit at least 50 people?
Yeah.
What is going to be the AV technology? Do you have your own that you can bring? Like Travis has done that for certain events that worked out really well. But it's great when the brewery already has it. And some do, because they have sometimes live music or trivia. But if it isn't a brewery, or it is a smaller one or a coffee shop, they might not have that. But then I think also part of the deal is they've got to actually promote it. They've got to put it out there on their website and on their social media pages as well. It's kind of got to be a partnership where you both agree you want crowds, you want people to spend money. And I think for us personally, it's just gotten down, like Emery said, we've got places we like. When we first started, part of it was to get awareness to other places in the different parts of like Loudoun County, for example. And then during the pandemic, we would just pick breweries to promote. And we would just try to drink beers from there just to try to get their names out because everyone was selling beers to go, basically, when they weren't open. And then when we got back to it, I think pretty quickly we're like, we're too busy to worry about bringing business to these places unless they want to kind of work with us and really do it. So now it's just gotten to the part where like I just kind of feel bad because I would like to sometimes try new places, and I've had a couple places reach out, but I've got like such a good thing at Star Hill that, you know, why would I not just go back there? So I've gotten kind of lazy in that regard, where, you know, I should probably try some new venues once in a while too. But sometimes when you have a good partnership, there's merit for that too, and there's something to be said for kind of maintaining that as well. So those are kind of like the key things to look for in kind of a new partnership in a different location. Is just the size, you know, the AV, the ability to hold the crowd, but then also to properly promote it.
Yeah, and don't be discouraged if you get some strikeouts, because there's it's all about, you know, sussing out not just your program but the relationship building too, and you don't want a relationship with everybody, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some stinkers where, they make us feel like, I don't shove you off to the back room and like,
or like they're doing us
your
a
little
really
thing,
big
and then
favor, and it's like, well, we're trying to, you know, we're here to help you, you know. It's
that's a thing. I've crossed that bridge also. So yes,
but John, you probably know too, because you had a good thing going with, you know, Gary Owens, and the same thing. Like if you've got a spot that's comfortable, and I think then you kind of build an audience too who kind of know about it and recognize it. So there's definitely something to be said for maintaining some of those best partnerships.
I think many times though I created something that was, how should I say this? Sometimes it was too accessible because of the fact that I was live streaming it as well. And so some people who could have been there decided to stay home. And then I couldn't use that number and that those numbers with the bar and say, hey, we brought in 60 people tonight. Some people just were like, oh, I'll just catch it live, because I've always been the guy that does the live streams and promotes accessibility for obvious reasons. Because I thought, well, maybe someone in like Colorado wants to watch, and we would get people, not realizing that people down the block wouldn't show up because they could just stay home and watch it. So I think that I had a great venue. I had a great team who, you know, they would email me if I didn't get on their calendar soon enough. They'd be like, are you coming to do another one next month? People were asking, and that was a huge honor to do that. I think the difference is your way of doing it is the right way to me, in that you're bringing the audience in because they have to be there to witness it. It's free to be there, but they have to be there to witness it. And that helps the venue understand that you're getting the most bang for your buck as well with this. And I think that's the thing that I would change up with mine if I ever started doing it again somewhere. I probably wouldn't live stream it out, because then it makes people come to the venue. And, you know, it's something though to consider in the future. But I had my home there at the Gary Owen. Shout out to them, because they were so generous with me and gave me great opportunities. I can't thank them enough. I want to do a reunion there sometime and just do another one, you know, do another one just for old time's sake. But that's the one thing that I would change. But it was a hell of a good time, and we had great crowds, and just like you all. And I was surprised first time I did one where how many people showed up. And that's when I realized something's going on here where more people need to do this, because you're creating accessibility to these good stories. And people are going to be here anyway, or they're thinking about coming out for a drink on a Thursday night. Might as well give them something to watch and have fun. So, you know.
Yeah, those people are always the most fun. The people who weren't there specifically for us, but just kind of get swept up into it. You know, they're just out for like a quiet night or a drink, or they're out on a date, and then we start talking, and you can see them kind of like drawn into the conversation. I think that's one of my favorite parts about doing history in such public places is, you know, as professional historians, we always hear all the horror stories of like, you know, how many people hate history, or like how, you know, I always hated history growing up, or history is boring, it's not interesting. And then you find that it's not the history, it's how they were taught, it's how it was presented to them, or it's just how they conceive of history. You know, it's, if they think of history as just names and dates, yeah, of course it's going to be awful. But when you think of history as human stories, it becomes awesome. I mean, think about how many people listen to like true crime podcasts.
Right.
We do true crime Historians on Tap. We fill the room because like that's essentially what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love that aspect of it.
I think that goes back to what you said earlier, Travis. That's storytelling. That's
Yeah.
the word. People don't say they're bored with storytelling. They say they're
Right.
bored with history, and maybe that's the key, is that it's storytelling more than it is, quote, you know, doing history. It's storytelling about history. The traditional way history was taught was storytelling.
Yeah, and I would say one thing that I always like to highlight is that we're not just telling irrelevant history too, or inconsequential. Like we cover some pretty big topics and sometimes pretty serious ones. And I think sometimes it gets dismissed, like, oh, if you're doing it at a brewery and you're only spending 20 minutes on a story, you
Right.
certainly are doing real history conversations,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous. And, you know, you can get more history across in that platform than you would, you know, necessarily sometimes in a 45-minute dry lecture.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes is the only thing that's ever frustrated me with the idea that you're not actually getting into some pretty important and, you know, in-depth and consequential history.
Yeah, and then just because we're telling it like this doesn't mean it's not academic either. You
Right.
know, I've been asked before if we'll like go tell ghost stories, and I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing here. That's a whole different thing. And if that's your thing, that's cool. But what we're doing is we are researching local history. You know, we're reaching back to primary documents. We are
Yes.
doing the job
Yes.
of a historian,
Mhm.
but we're just taking that and kind of filtering it into a medium that everyone can enjoy.
Right. It's not diet history.
Yeah, it's not
It's
dumbed
still
down.
history.
It's not diet.
Yeah.
Like it's
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah,
we might still be telling you a story that has humor to it, but it's factual history, you know, and it, you know, largely pertains to some kind of larger historical event or trend. Yeah.
So I have to ask this question because this is something that I encountered when I was doing events. I always had themes that were like my go-tos. I'm like, okay, this is the theme that I really like. And mine personally was like WTF moments in history or WTF moments in the Civil War, because we were in Gettysburg. I had to do Civil War. It drew them in. It also took, like, both my sponsors said, no, we're not sponsoring that because it has WTF in the title. So I was like, okay, but you're going to miss the biggest draw.
Yeah.
What has been a theme that you really enjoyed? Like what talk theme have you been like, that was a really good one there that I really enjoyed?
We've had some good ones.
Oh, I know. I'm just wondering what's the.
We've done the WTF too.
A few bad
will.
romance, bad romance, and that is always good because I think everyone can identify with like stories of bad breakups and jilted lovers and stuff like that. That might be my favorite theme that we've done because again, it's so personal. I mean, how much more personal can you get?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed the one we did about historical feuds.
Yes.
Where it's in the same similar boat with like a bad romance where maybe you're getting in with someone in a romantic relationship, but even friendship's gone wrong or political alliances gone horribly wrong. I think I love getting into the feuds of it and kind of the messiness of history.
Yeah, I like this. I'll say maybe an honorable mention in there too for me is I have really enjoyed our true crime discussions, and there have been some that we've been actually a theme of true crime, and there have been others that we've just each told different true crime stories, or stories about like historic, you know, kind of tragedies. And one of the reasons I really like them is because I feel like in a lot of modern true crime consumption, there's sometimes a lack of, what's the right word? I don't know, almost respect in some ways. You know, it's kind
like
of
sensationalized.
sensational or it's gossipy. And one of the things that I like to do when we tell true crime stories is that we'll tell the big headlines, and we'll tell how people at that time, consumed this news. And there is often an element of sensationalism, but some of the most impactful moments of History on Tap is when I feel like we've been able to draw this is a real person, who existed, even if it was hundreds of years ago and their whole life fell apart. And we are here now, not just to talk about it, but to honor the fact that, gosh, all we have left of these people is remembering the worst thing that ever happened to them, and so there's again, to that idea of like, so what, the so what part of it, and it's not just to consume their lives or consume their stories, but to, in a way, remember and honor them too.
So you've been doing it now for years. What is it? 5 years now.
5 years. Yeah.
Something like that.
You've done a lot of different themes. You've done a lot of different stories. Is there one theme that you haven't done yet that you'd like to do? Something you'd like to cover? I know Travis is getting ready for the 250th of the Revolution, so that might come into play here.
That'll be some rich ground to cover for sure. I mean, as an
this is Travis's moment coming up. Like, he was built for this.
shine.
Yeah. I'm sure
No, that's actually a really great question. Something that I always thought would be fun, and it's a little kind of outside of our wheelhouse. I would love to do like a sports history one.
Oh, interesting.
And I know Joe would be all.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to, with sometimes the local history can be a bit prohibitive, and I think that's why sometimes it's good to kind of mix in either maybe an occasional story that's not necessarily local per se, but I think maybe branching out to be a bit more just topical, like, again, some sports related. Or I always think, like, if there's a big science happening or a natural thing that's going on, bringing in stories that are more contemporary, that are relatable to an event that's happening or circumstance. So, something like an anniversary coming up, maybe more about that. So maybe sometimes, not always, but sometimes moving away from local history for every program, and sometimes just tapping into really almost on a national level what maybe the country's curious in.
Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of my colleagues at the university who are they study the Roman Empire and stuff, they're all getting ready for the comebacks from Gladiator 2, and they're like, okay, all this stuff is going to start with this. So I can totally see that going off like popular culture. What's really hot right now in popular culture, theming something off of that, or the anniversaries, like we said with Travis.
We have talked about doing a movie themed one in the past, and we've never done it. God, we could each pick our least favorite historical film and just rip it apart.
I think the problem with that is, like, we all decided that there's no way that, number one, we could keep it short, and number two, that we wouldn't just like drink ourselves under the table getting so mad about some of these movie adaptations.
Right.
Yeah, slippery slope.
It is. It's dangerous. Maybe that's like extended content, something,
Yeah.
If we ever start recording these again or something, maybe we'll do a bonus edition.
I will say that's another benefit to always keeping it live, is that there's not a record afterwards of like what was said.
Yeah, I never thought of that. The VOD is out there, so it's on demand for all of my stuff. And I'm like, oh, maybe that's a bad thing, especially with the WTF moments. It got a little out of hand with that. But so what is going on in the future of Historians on Tap? Do you have events scheduled now for the rest of this year or next year, or what's happening on the home front with that?
Well, Anne Marie's home front is definitely going to make it tougher.
Well, that's true. Thank you, Anne Marie, for
way to out her.
I've done a lot on live stream. We have not had anyone go into labor or anything like that.
Not yet. Way to jinx it, John.
We're almost done. You'll be fine.
Yeah, actually, we really don't have anything on the books, and I mean, part of that for me is like the fall, and I know certainly with Travis too, and really for Anne Marie as well. The fall is just a bear to get through with events and programs. It's just such a busy one with public programming, I think, for all three of us. And for pretty much everyone in this field. So when the winter comes, like, I certainly want to try to get up. I've yet to do one at Frederick Social. Yeah, so I think certainly once winter comes along and things calm down a bit, but then especially in the summer as well, I'm hoping that we have a little more flexibility to come up and do some new venues as well, and maybe even revisit some of the old themes we've done too.
Yeah, we often have a holiday special. And so while one is not currently on the books, if you follow our Facebook page or look us up, when and if a date is set, that'd be the best place to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to get a holiday special in before the end of the year, but other than that, yeah, it's busy.
Life happens.
Life happens.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe a rich benefactor will come around and tell us that they want to franchise Historians on Tap, and we can just do it full time. But until then, it's just it's about balancing some other things too, and when we can find the time to do them.
Right. Yeah. Ken is definitely throwing it in there. He wants to know if you want to brave I-95.
I don't. I despise I-95.
Does he want to? Will he do it anyways? Well,
someday, remember the topic of Historians on Tap is going to be me and my historic feud with I-95.
I-95, yeah.
That's a good feud to talk about.
I can tell you what, I don't win
material. Yeah.
Yeah. Then there will be some drinks, and you better not film it. So. Well, thank you all for coming on here. I really appreciate it. This came together in like a week, and I know it was quick, but I'm glad you had the time to come on and speak to me about this. And I definitely want everybody who's watching on Facebook to go and like Historians on Tap. I appreciate everyone on Facebook and YouTube watching us. Again, guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to do it anytime.
Always good to see you.
Take care, everyone.